Coming up, a salute to two brothers from Canada who helped the Smothers Brothers and others change the course of comedy variety shows on television. That's next on Blye TV, the podcast. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Blye TV, the podcast. I'm your host, Bill Blye. Now, way back when I was moving into my teen years in the late 60s, there was this show on TV that really captured my imagination, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Very, very funny show. Now, I kept noticing this name in the credits, Allan Byle. He became the head writer of the show, and among a revolution in comedy writing, a lot of younger people. Among the people in the writing room, there was Steve Martin, Mason Williams, Bob Einstein, and Rob Reiner. I think they were all in their 20s. And these were the young Turks who, as Nixon was moving into the White House, served as the loyal opposition. It was years before I discovered that Blye was born in Canada and in Winnipeg, of all places. He had a friend from back home, David Steinberg, who came on the show a few times and was so cheeky, he helped CBS find an excuse to fire the Smothers Brothers. And this was a slap in the face of a whole new generation of TV viewers. Blye, however, went right on writing and producing for the likes of Sonny Cher, Dick Van Dyke, who had a variety show in the 70s, John Byner on Bizarre, and Super Dave Osborne, who was played, of course, by Blye's old writing room recruit, Einstein. Now, sadly, the great Allan Byle passed away just this past October at 88 years of age. In order to salute his great career, I'm privileged to welcome his younger brother, who also had a wonderful show business career in North American television, Garry Blye. Now, he started out as a talent agent representing Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley. So, if you're starting out as a talent agent, those are pretty good clients. Later, he represented John Candy and Mama Cass Elliot. He later started working with his brother Alan on variety shows headlined by Andy Williams and later Sonny Cher, before moving on with the Hudson Brothers, Red Fox, and many others. His most recent TV credits, documentaries, and other shows in Canada, they're worth celebrating as well. So please welcome Mr. Garry Blye. Thank you very, very much for doing this. And I want to first offer condolences. Very sad news, your brother Alan passing away so recently. So condolences on that. It must be a very tender time for you and your family.
Bill, it is a tender time, but it's interesting. My brother, I think, chose his moments in terms of I think he kind of knew it was his time. And as it turned out, the thing he talked about most, and I listened to this recording, my nephew played it for me, that the Academy recorded in 2019, in which he was asked what he thought his greatest accomplishment. And he said his greatest accomplishment was his ability to be a cantor to his very last days. And he died on the second day of Jewish New Year. So I would say to you, on the one hand, it's difficult, but on the other hand, it didn't surprise me that would be his choice.
Wow. Well, the roots of both of you from Winnipeg and how the whole story about him being a cantor there is fascinating. And it's just what you guys achieved in Hollywood and in Canada in terms of television. I have to tell you, Garry, I'm 67. The Smothers Brothers was a formative show for me. I think it may be why I spent a career writing about television. And I was such a fan of all these other amazing variety shows. So you guys were at the intersection of the culture in such a strong, vital way. It's a fascinating story. So I'm very pleased to be speaking with you today. I'm sorry I never got a chance to speak with your brother, Alan, but thank you for all of the wonderful work you guys have done.
The thing I tell people often is the fact that we got paid was the biggest bonus. We loved what we were doing. I swear to you, it's true. You measure yourself by, how you get paid, but the truth, and we certainly got paid, but we were both looking at each other often and say, is this really happening? This is 10 years into it. It never stopped. It was the same feeling every time we did something. It was exciting, and it never stopped being exciting. And it hasn't stopped being exciting, frankly.
I'm sure that's true. In fact, I imagine you've heard from a lot of old friends that you hadn't maybe talked to in a while with the death of your brother.
Yes, absolutely. Interesting comments that various folks that, friends and family have sent me and called me about. And, you don't realize, certainly neither he nor I, but you realize how many people you touch by what you do. As he would say, if someone would call him and say, I need you, it's happened many years ago. We were doing Bazaar, and a friend of his who had been the principal at the Temple Sinai when he was the cantor there called him and said, actually, it was a guy by the name of Eddie Goldfarb. He was a rabbi in Hamilton, and called him and said, Alan, our cantor has gotten sick or something to that effect. Could you be kind enough and come here and do the high holiday service for us? And he said, What time do you start? And we were there. Honest, and I was like, okay, great. That is the best example of who he was and what his calling was.
Yeah, incredible. Now, most folks. Just to recap briefly, you guys, your careers intersected quite a bit on a lot of these shows that we're going to be talking about. But it all started in Winnipeg, as you've said, and I'm just fascinated about that. There's been a lot of very Monty Hall, different creative people, the Guess Who, like Winnipeg. What was in the water? Because it just seems like a long way from Hollywood, Garry. But was there something about growing up in that city that helped you?
Well, culture was a very big part of growing up in Winnipeg, and for us, it started with our older brother, who was the original cantor of our group, so much so that my late grandfather, who I never met, I'm named after, would take him to various congregations around the city and throughout Manitoba. When he was 6 and 7 years old, he was one of those, I guess, from a spiritual standpoint, I guess you'd call him a musical prodigy, because he just had a great memory, and he had the tonality.
Wow.
But for him, for our older brother, it was just too young. You know what I'm saying? The pressure of doing that over years, he lost interest in wanting to be a performer. Mm-hmm. But when my brother came along and started to show the signs of really what eventually was going to happen, my brother Sid threw himself into helping his career along. And when Alan first came to California in the early 50s, Sid had a very good friend. His name was Buddy Bregman, who was a record producer, I believe, at Capitol Records. And so he introduced Alan to Buddy Bregman. And Buddy listened to him and said, you've got a really good voice, but you could do with some seasoning. You could use some vocal coaching. And so my brother Sid tracked down what turned out to be probably the best vocal coach in Southern California. And the first thing she said to him was, we are going to work on giving you the power and the range that will give your instrument lasting quality. And she made the biggest difference.
Wow.
She took a wonderful voice and gave it the depth and gave him the understanding of how to take care of his instrument and how to use it properly.
Well, I got to try.
The reason I know that is because they tried to get me to do the same thing, and so I knew how good she was. I couldn't do that, but I knew what the message was.
Were you ever a cantor?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
We're all part of the same groupings, only at different stages in our lives.
Good for you guys. And I'm going to jump ahead a bit, because one of the credits that leaps out when you look at Allan Bly's career is that he wrote on the 1968 Elvis Presley comeback special, which is still an extraordinary achievement, quite entertaining. And I'm just wondering, did your brother and Elvis ever talk singing?
Yes, indeed. In fact, my brother and Elvis became really good friends.
Wow.
Because,
wow.
Alan and when he first started working with Elvis, had no idea of his depth and his range. He had an idea because he was, a star from the 50s and 60s until they met and they started to talk about music. And Elvis's connection to spiritual music and, that whole connection to his world that none of us really understood or knew. We knew he had Christmas albums and they sold 1 million a year. And the reason I can tell you I knew they sold 1 million a year because I was working for Tom Parker at the time.
Wow. That's right. You had your own agency.
A lot.
Yeah. What a story.
I knew more about what was going on than probably anybody else, and I've always kept that to myself. And Alan has his own reasons for telling the stories he has, but mine are still sitting back because time hasn't come yet.
Well, you may have known.
It will come, and when I'm ready, we're working on a doc, and when we get it going, I'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Oh, well, I was wondering, this is a documentary that everyone should see. I'm thrilled to hear that that's in the works, and that'll be a great one. So please keep me posted on that. Well, let's go back a bit, but before Elvis, to Alan's career in television. And I understand one of his earliest credits was as an actor for Fred Rogers. I guess when the early version of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was in production in Toronto. Is that true? Actually,
that is true, but his credits go back earlier than that when he replaced Robert Goulet in Summer Showtime in 1957 or 58, I believe.
Wow, incredible.
He was a really good singer, believe me. He was a great vocalist, pop singer extraordinaire.
Yeah, amazing. Now, when he started, so he was working on other CBC productions then. How did he come to the attention of Fred Rogers? Do you know?
Well, they actually met. Alan was going to a rehearsal for another show. He actually was I forget whether it was a radio television show in the old CBC building. And Fred was in one of the studios, and they just happened to walk by and see him. They started up a conversation. And when Al finished his rehearsal, he went back to act. Fred was waiting for him and offered him a job.
Amazing. That's great. And that association.
They stayed friends for the rest of Fred's life, for sure. When they had they honored Alan with a major banquet in Winnipeg, and Fred, when he was contacted, couldn't wait to do a video for Alan. It was quite sweet and quite personal.
Wow. Well, not a shock to hear that. That's he certainly seemed to be that kind of person. But I mean, you must have. I mean, you were much younger than your brother, but not so young.
7 years younger than my brother.
Okay. So, but when you watched him on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, you were watching as a brother, not as a young fan, I guess.
You're right. I always watched and listened to him as a brother. And as a result, you get, believe it or not, as a family member, you're more critical than a fan because you know what he's rehearsed and you can hear it. And it all started, the truth about Alan and my viewing him comes in early in music because even before the cantorial aspect of my relationship with him, because I was too young, he was a violinist and he used to get up every morning and practice. And every evening, I would say he would put in somewhere between 3 to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, sometimes 6, meaning Sunday through Friday. Saturdays, we'd go to a service. And he would conduct, that's when I first would see him conducting services. And then in the afternoon, we'd go to recitals that he and my cousin played. My cousin was a brilliant pianist. And so the two of them would do a recital every Saturday afternoon, 40 weeks a year.
Wow. And
they did that for about 2 years.
So, you guys are very disciplined.
Yeah. And he was he was always disciplined.
Amazing. Now, I want to get to a name from someone I watched as a youngster is Juliette, of course. People listening, older folks would remember. Juliette. Yeah, our pet Juliette. And my memory is that she came on before the hockey game on Saturday nights, I think back when I was a youngster, it was so long ago. The games came
in Toronto. She came on after hockey game.
Okay, so that's the thing. I knew it was one or the other. Well, that makes sense because her show would have been more for adults.
Sure it just fit between. I think it was Rex Loring would do a 5-minute news piece. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And then they go to Juliette.
That's wild. I know Rex's daughter Elaine. When I was a youngster, I was a busboy.
Well.
Okay, so when I was a busboy at Ontario Place, I used to clear Elaine's tables at the Blockhouse restaurant. That was about 50 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Elaine.
Yeah. There you go. So Juliette is a very big name in Canadian entertainment. She's a singer and she has a variety show. And your brother wrote for her, right?
But he wrote in two levels. He was gifted in that he could also write special material as well as writing dialogue. And so that combination is what gave him an easy call for writing for almost anybody. And eventually, that became his forte.
I think I read a quote from Juliette about your brother saying to the effect that you could write anything for me, but just don't change who I am. Something like that, right?
I think that's correct. And in fact, they didn't change who she was. They just enhanced her range. And the show's ratings just kept getting better throughout the time that they worked together.
Yeah. Well, Garry Blye will be right back after these messages.
Tomorrow, we'll start the day tomorrow with a smile for you. Till then, I hope you're feeling happy. Till then, I hope your day is snappy. Tomorrow, it soon will be tomorrow and be our day. We'll say a happy tomorrow to you.
Do you ever wonder why your parents turned out the way they did? Come out to the Westdale Theatre in Hamilton on Saturday, November 23rd, starting at 1 p.m. I'll be there with my 16mm projector showing some classic cartoons, the ones many of us watched on TV every Saturday morning back in the 60s and 70s. Now, I'm talking the new adventures of Pinocchio, Tales of the Wizard of Oz, and then there was Rocket Robin Hood and the Mighty Hercules. Look, you can see Diver Dan, a live-action kiddie series that was shot through a fish tank. Finally, don't miss a rare screening of one of the best animated hour-long shows of every boomer's youth. Gasp as your parents sing along with every word of the theme song. It's all part of the TV on Film party scheduled for Saturday, November 23rd at 1 p.m. And yes, there will be cool TV trivia prizes generously provided by our friends at Retro Festive. Go to thewestdale.ca for tickets and information. Back for a second season this month on Super Channel is Finally Caught. You think the only cold cases in Canada contain 24 beers? This is a true crime show where murderers go cold, leaving unanswered questions, and killers are left to run free, assuming they've gotten away with murder. These cold cases demand justice for the people impacted. New evidence or stunning new testimony comes to light, allowing law enforcement officers to piece together what happened, with the killer being finally caught. It's an all-Canadian series from Blackwatch Entertainment. See Season 2 this November on Super Channel, available via most cable providers across the country, as well as streaming live and on demand with Amazon Prime Video channels and Apple TV+.
Comes now, ladies and gentlemen, Super Dave Osborne.
How you doing, pal? And,
great.
The show got away from me tonight. It's never happened before. I was having a terrific time, and then I said, I've got to do a stunt, and I looked, and I don't have time to do the stunt.
Well, I think you're taking on way too many outside projects. I've been telling you this for months. You are so popular and in such great demand, you're burning the candle at both ends.
When you're right, you're right. I looked at my calendar the other day, and there wasn't room for a fly speck. It's just completely full, and I'm going to have to make some adjustments in my schedule. I'm going to sit back, and in the words of that great lady, Helen Reagan,
Nancy.
I'm going to have to just sing now.
Well, anyway.
And we're back again with Garry Blye. Here's the leap I need your help with, Garry. It's that going from Juliette to the Smothers Brothers. Now, were the Smothers Brothers once guests on Juliette, or how did Tommy Smothers, he get on their radar?
I can't give you, I can't tell you exactly how I got on the radar, but my sensibility was that some other people had mentioned Allan to the Smothers Brothers, and they were here at the CNE. And my recollection of what Allan said, it was Tommy who suddenly remembered when the guys were here saying, "Are we supposed to talk to some Canadian guy?" And I think Allan said, as he recounted to me, Billy said, "Yeah, we're supposed to call." Dickie said, "Supposed to call." He pulled up Allan's number he had on his ledger, and so that's how he called Allan and said, "We hear you do this, you hear we do that. Would you be interested in coming to Hollywood to write?" And Allan said he thought that it was Rich Little putting him on.
That's funny. Had Allan worked with Rich Little at that point?
Yes, he had.
That's wild. And I've heard this story a few times. Tommy Smothers just calling somebody at random, whether it's Steve Martin or and basically saying, "I'd like you to work for me."
Well, actually, Tommy called Bob Einstein. Steve Martin actually auditioned for them.
Okay.
And Allan described the audition as the most audacious audition he'd been at and had ever seen and ever heard, and laughed their asses off. And let me tell you, it would take me another 10 minutes, and at some point I'd be happy to sit down with you and tell you what he did and how it worked out. But in the description, I was laughing as Allan described what Steve was doing.
That's funny. Yeah, I bet.
Oh, yeah.
Were you also working on the Smothers Brothers? Were you part of that group?
When I was not when the series started, but in 1968, when I went to work for the William Morris Agency, and they immediately asked me if I would be interested in working with Tom Parker, I said, "When do I start?" Yeah. They said, "Today." So I got my car and drove to the MGM lot, and met the colonel's staff and met him a couple of days later. And his offices were the old Clark Gable dressing room, which was the size of a studio. Wow. And it's the biggest office you've ever seen. Amazing. Anyway, an interesting time. So from that moment in time on, one of the things that the Morris office encouraged all of us is to, go out and be a part of everything that's going on. So I was at as many variety shows as you can possibly imagine, but always at Smothers Brothers tapings. And basically, it was a 7-day-a-week job if you wanted to be on top of what was going on. I bet. And I've got the DVD of the Smothers Brothers season 3, and there's the one show that was done during a strike. I think the music union and they had to sort of do it in the round. It was a very unique, special show, a terrific show. I don't know if you went to all the tapings, you might know what I might remember that. Was that something that sticks out? I don't remember a strike. I remember a strike when we were doing Sonny and Cher, but okay. I don't remember a strike when the Smothers Brothers did. I think it was more that the band, the music, they all had to just hum the theme song, and then they had it was a great theme. Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, because they used to use that intro of the musicians and they're yeah. Okay. Very cool show. The Nelson Reynolds theme. That's right. Yeah, and the dancers. Now, obviously, that to me, that show is fascinating on many levels. But it must have been like being in the eye of a hurricane. The CBS censors. There was so much political upheaval, and the Smothers Brothers and their guests are part of it. As is David Steinberg, another guy. You guys probably grew up with or knew and wrote for, right? Yes, we did, and we knew. We did grow up with him, and we knew him. David is in between. He's younger than Allan, a little older than me, and both he and I went to parochial school at the same time, so he was a couple of grades ahead of me. Wow! But I knew David, and David's older brother was a very good friend of our older brother. So yes, in a community, and we were all in that same community. We pretty much all knew each other. Amazing. And Steinberg, of course, famously went on and did a
sort of homilies where he would do joke about the Bible and religious things, and this apparently was a sore point for CBS, right?
Well, I don't think it was a sore point for CBS, but it was a sore point for some of the affiliates in the Deep South at that time. Right. And broadcasters always are looking to make certain that their affiliates are that their needs are met. Yeah. But it was never an issue in the big cities. It was an issue in a portion of the country, and they needed to make certain that they kept those affiliates happy. But it started in it all started at the Democratic Convention. Yeah. And from that, they took Harry Belafonte, if I'm not mistaken, was the first guest of that season, and they did a piece about the rioting in the streets. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my recollection. Yep.
Oh no, they had that whole season is fascinating. I actually interviewed Tom and Dick. They came to the Roy Thompson Hall many years ago when I worked at TV Guide, and Tommy wasn't going to talk to me because I worked for TV Guide. The original U.S. guide, seriously, he wouldn't come out of the dressing room because the U.S. guide basically they did an editorial where they said that this was un-American and these guys should be run off television, and so he wasn't too happy about that, and he said, well, did you guys run that? And I wasn't there in 68 or so I said it wasn't me. Anyway, Dickie calmed him down, and we ended up doing a great interview. But boy, he still had sharp feelings about that.
It's fascinating because TV Guide was owned by Walter Annenberg, and his father was far from being a conservative. His father started the race journal.
That's where the money came from. Yep.
That's where the money came from. But Walter became an establishment personality and probably the biggest supporter of Ronald Reagan. And so it's not surprising that the TV Guide might have written an editorial that would be in opposition to whatever Tommy was saying, because he was also a huge supporter of Nixon.
Yeah, well, he was. That came up in that interview. And I believe that the Canadian station that carried the Smothers Brothers was CTV at the time, and they ran the Steinberg episode that didn't show in the States.
To my knowledge, they did.
Yeah,
because they weren't told not to. They would send it by courier. They had it in their hands. They ran it.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. You must have got to meet Pat Paulsen. I mean, imagine Pat Paulsen today. He'd probably get elected, right?
Yes, but he got lots of votes even then.
Right.
It was fascinating. The campaign was hysterical, but he did get votes.
Yeah. Now, for people who don't know, Pat Paulsen was a comedian on the Smothers Brothers, very deadpan, and he famously ran for president in 68 and got hundreds of thousands of votes. I think, he was maybe a factor in Nixon getting elected, but a very, very funny man, and somebody who passed away several years ago, but he made an impact for sure. Did you know him? Did you get to talk to him?
I would see, Pat would be, he would only, he would show up on set and then he was offset. He was not a guy that ran around, that sort of was a crowd pleaser.
Right. Okay. Got it. But very, very funny on the show.
Very, very funny, but tended to sort of not be, I never saw him after the show. I would, oftentimes be up in the office waiting for Al. I never saw everybody else, but I never saw Pat. See him on set, he'd say, hi, how are you? Because he knew who I was. Very, congenial, but I never saw him, other than I'm working, I never really, never got a sense of what his personal, what he was like away from doing his character.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's go back. I want to ask a bit more about David Steinberg, because after Smothers Brothers, so we're jumping all over the place here, but the David Steinberg show was on in the early 70s. It was a variety show that I believe was shot in Toronto, and very ahead of its time. I think you worked on that with your brother, right?
No, I worked on that with Perry Rosemont. My brother was not involved in that.
Oh, well, Perry Rosemont, the great...
Perry Rosemont was the director.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've met Perry, wonderful director. He did many, many years of the Royal Canadian Air Force. And so...
He's a great guy. Terrific guy.
Yeah.
Again, another Winnipegger that we all grew up with. And interestingly enough, Perry's early roots were as a documentary filmmaker.
Wow. Well...
And he found his way in... I mean, comedy was always part of his life as well. It was a terrific... That was a wonderful show to work on.
I bet. And let me look at the people who were part of the cast. So this was new. These guys had never been on TV before. John Candy, Dave Thomas, Martin Short, Andrea Martin, among others. So you were very involved in this one. Could you tell right away that these guys would go on to shape comedy for decades?
We knew that every one of them was special. When you find a group of people who work so well together, and they really worked well with David, it had that magic moment. And years later, when David did one of his specials, it was he and John, and that was as if they had worked their entire lives together again. They just had a magic, and when you were with them and you on set, we laughed a lot.
I bet. Yeah. No, very fun. So many funny people all in one room. That show today probably would do better than then. Why wasn't it a bigger hit?
It actually was a pretty good hit, but the dynamic again was economics. Not that we were getting a fortune, believe me. We created a show that would have cost 5 times that in America.
Right.
But CTV, its abilities to commission programming for a price point in which they could handle it all was getting more difficult, even in the early, even at that point, which are the early 70s. And they'd only done one real co-production, and that was the Andy Williams Presents Who Was the Ray Stevens Show, because NBC had the lion's share. We put a deal together directly with CTV, and it worked itself out. But it wasn't for lack of having an audience and lack of anything else. It just boiled down to dollars and cents. And I think David actually said, "I'd like to get paid for doing this at some point." And was that an unreasonable request?
No, yeah.
And there were no tax deals. So remember, there were no leveraging. Everything, you got $1, you spent $1, and no one gave you any help.
Right. Wow. That changed later into the end of the 70s when I guess Hollywood North, that whole reputation. But let's talk a bit about
when John Turner budget came out and started to give leverage to motion pictures and eventually television. It did change the entire complexion of what you could and couldn't do. And if we'd had even a portion of those kinds of opportunities, I think David Show would have run 3 to 5 years.
It's almost fun though to watch, and you get that it's being done on a Canadian dime because it isn't lavish, but it almost makes it more fun to watch. I think there's something about.
I think. Yeah, it was. We say a tight budget. We had 3 full-time sets, and we would create environments for. If we had a musical guest, we had to figure out how to create an environment for them.
Wow.
Anyway, it was fun.
Let's talk a bit about some of the big names that you guys separately and together worked on shows, variety shows. You mentioned Andy Williams. I noticed in the credits the Ken Berry Wow Show, a summer replacement, I believe. And then, of course, Sonny and Cher. My goodness. The Hudson Brothers. That's something I never miss. The Hudson Brothers Razzle Dazzle Show.
Razzle Dazzle Show. That was a wonderful experience. Lots of energy, great cast. We had Steve Martin. We had a terrific cast.
Well, set the table on that one because I may be a little confused. There was, I think, like a Saturday morning Hudson Brothers show, and then this was more of an evening variety show, or am I?
Yeah. Razzle Dazzle, you're right. Razzle Dazzle was an 18-show commitment from CBS and CTV kids show, which had an 18-show original commitment and ran for 2 years. So you got to see a lot of reruns. Long before reruns were the rule of thumb. In addition to that, CBS licensed an 8-episode summer series, which was the Hudson Brothers Variety Series. So the first 18 shows were shot here in Toronto, and then we went back to Los Angeles and shot the other 8 in Hollywood at CBS Television City.
And the Hudson Brothers the act was sort of a musical act and comedy act, right? That these guys were, pop stars as well as comedy stars. And it was just, what a time. Everything seemed to be, you had Laugh-In and the Smothers Brothers and then the Hudson Brothers and all of these shows that were just a new generation of variety show, right, Garry?
Absolutely. I mean, when George Schlatter and Ed Friendly, got Laugh-In on the air, everyone was stunned because Laugh-In certainly, pushed. They were the first real show that pushed the envelope.
Mm-hmm. But then you had you and your brother and other Canadians, Pepiat and I can't remember the other fellow. That it just seems.
Pepiat Nailsworth had actually, if I'm not mistaken, had gone to America when Norman Jewison was hired to work on the Perry Como show, and I think they ended up working on that show as writers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my recollection.
I bet you're right, but it fascinates me that Canadians were so involved. They were the architects, really, of the modern television variety show. Is that because we're a nation that looked across the border and just watched everything, maybe had influence from Britain as well as America, or is it just a coincidence?
No, I think it's not a coincidence. We saw, I mentioned this the other day to my wife, Dinah Shore was an enormous star in the 50s.
Yeah.
And she dominated. I mean, you just got that sense of personality and personalities all the time. The Sullivan Show brought every kind of culture to you from a guy who could barely speak, but it didn't matter because he didn't get in the way of the talent. That's what was so great about it.
Right.
We knew he was a journalist, and he still had his column in, I forget which newspaper, into the like the first 5 years of his series.
Yeah.
So, he just got used to a guy who could stammer or stumble, but it didn't matter because the talent that they booked was so great. And then, of course, the original Williams show where, you had the boys, the Osmond Brothers as little boys, and black and white series. But again, music. And that's what I think really captured our imagination. We did not have the same kind of identity in Canada we liked all those Westerns, but we didn't have a Western history, so to speak.
Right.
We did have it, but it wasn't front and center. So,
no, the big musical show.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
All these other Western shows, Gunsmoke and all the other shows, Bat Masterson, and they're all great, but they weren't something that we aspired to make.
Right. Yeah. No, the big musical Canadian show was Don Messer's Jubilee. It just
it was that, and it was Jack Kane's Music Makers, which was tremendous because he had the best musical performers, the best jazz performers, you name it, he had them.
Right.
And so that also, it was driven by the music. And so, it became much easier to see where we fit in.
Interesting. Yeah. Incredible. The other thing that I wanted to ask just about the segue back to comedy is and walk me through this if you can, because eventually you guys are involved in Van Dyke and Company, which was Dick Van Dyke's variety show. It ran in 1976 and I think won an Emmy as the best variety show that year, even though it was canceled after one season.
That's kind of like, that's kind of like the CBC having the Porter winning every award and canceling it. That made me. That's why I compared the Porter to the Dick Van Dyke show when that happened a couple of years ago.
Right. Yeah. It was odd, but and did both you and Alan work on that show?
Yes, we did.
Mm. And
that he was a favorite of both Alan, myself, and I think I can speak. I can't speak for Bob, but I assume that was the case as well because of the relationship that they all developed. and he was the consummate talent. There wasn't anything that Dick couldn't or wouldn't do. He did anything that was asked of him. He was terrific. I mean, he could, as we know, he could sing, he can dance, he could do comedy, and he could be sweet. He just, the camera loved him, and he loved his audience.
Yeah, it comes across, doesn't it? And that's what you always hear. Carl Reiner, Steve Martin, everybody says the same thing. There's nothing he couldn't do, and he's still doing it, which is pretty incredible.
No.
Yeah.
It's beyond belief. He's 89 years old, and he's still out there, doing stuff. I hand it to him.
Yeah, amazing. Now, who else was involved in that show? Who was in the company?
Geez, you know what? I have to be honest with you. I can't recall any of the members of the company at this very moment. I can see a few people, but I can't remember their names.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this way, Garry, because I'm putting you on the spot, asking you what happened in 50 years ago. But David Byner and Bizarre came later, but there seems to have been you guys were working on both shows, and I remember there was even a sketch on an early episode of Bizarre that really looked like it was taken from Van Dyke and Company, where he's out golfing and he's knee deep in water and things like this.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the funniest sketches ever done.
Yeah.
When he's on the golf course and he looks down and he sees his ball and he hits it and all this stuff comes out at the same time. It was a hysterical piece.
You're right. Very funny. Stay tuned for more of our salute to Allan and Garry Blye. This month, like every month, there's something for every member of the family on Paramount Plus Canada. The big news is the return of Yellowstone, back for a 5th season. This is the story of the Dutton family, who control the largest cattle ranch in the United States. And yes, Kevin Costner will be back, along with the rest of the ensemble. Fans of executive producer Taylor Sheridan can look forward to his latest series, Landman, which looks at the fortune-seeking world of Texas oil rigs. Billy Bob Thornton, Demi Moore, John Hamm, and Andy Garcia are among the stars. Then there's The Agency, which explores the world of international intrigue and espionage. Michael Fassbender and Richard Gere star. Finally, there's the music documentary Larger Than Life, Reign of the Boy Bands, featuring NSYNC, 98 Degrees, Backstreet Boys, Hanson, New Kids on the Block, and others. And remember, there's a mountain of entertainment every month on Paramount Plus. Have you seen Creepy Bits? No, not Timbits that have been left out in the sun too long. Creepy Bits, the all-Canadian-made horror series. The 10-episode second season premieres in November on Hollywood Suite. What began as a do-it-yourself YouTube series of bite-sized shorts has evolved into a full-blown horror sensation. Some episodes take place in a cabin in the woods, another in a houseboat where strange noises can be heard coming from the murky depths. Each episode is helmed by a diverse range of innovative filmmakers, including series creator and executive producer David J. Fernandez. The second season premieres November 19th, exclusively on Hollywood Suite. Viewers can also binge all of the episodes on Hollywood Suite On Demand starting November 1st.
In a few days, the voters will go to the polls and elect a man to ruin the country. I mean, run the country. All the other candidates are making 11th hour appeals seeking a convincing mandate from the people. And the people are making 11th hour appeals for a convincing candidate. Various voting systems will be used in this election. First, there's the plain old X on the ballot. Then there's voting by machine, and this year many of you have indicated you will use yet another method, the eeny, meeny, miny, mo system.
In closing, folks, those are the issues. And remember the Pat Paulsen for President slogan, I've upped my standards, now up yours.
And we're back. What brought you then to work with John Byner?
Well, here's the Allan and Bob had signed a deal with ABC, and they did a pilot with Richard Dawson, and got a 40 share, an enormous number. And ABC wanted to do the show, but but as kind of like what we were talking about with CTV in the early 70s, this wasn't prepared to pay the price for a full series. And Richard Dawson, said, I'm not going to go to Canada because I have this other series, and I'm sorry about that, guys. And because based on the dollars that ABC was willing to offer for the series, we were looking around to see how we could do the series and afford it. And the best location was going to be Toronto. And when they went back, the Morris office went back to Richard Dawson and said, look, here's the situation, guaranteed 26 episodes, but they can't, they have to go to Toronto to do the show. And he said, guys, I love this show, but I can't leave here to be gone 3 months from my other series. I think he was doing a Family Feud, right?
Right.
The host of Family Feud. And they weren't shooting 5 shows a day in those days. I think they were doing 2 a day. So it was, or maybe 3, but it was a really tough schedule.
Right.
And he said, I just can't get up and leave. And so Allan and Bob sat down and tried to figure out who could they get that would give them the possibility of doing the kind of show they wanted to do. And after meeting with John and seeing the kind of attitude he has and his wide range, they decided he would be the right guy. And then from that, ABC said, not interested, but you guys can go your own way. And they went to Showtime, and Showtime said, we love this show, and if you guys think he's the right guy, we're in. CTV was happy to work with Allan no matter what. And so they trusted his judgment, and the rest is history, because it became the #1 comedy show on Showtime, where they had done no comedy before.
Yeah.
None of any consequence.
It's fascinating. Who else but John Byner could have done that show? Richard Dawson could not have done Bizarre. Not
the show that he ended up with. Absolutely not. But the show that was done as the pilot wasn't quite as it was a little tamer, but it was equally as funny. It did some very funny stuff, and you just described, kind of thing. In that one, they had a situation where George Allen had a piece, and he was trying to figure out. Try to get his guys tougher, and in the one sketch, he plants his guys on the ground and has his field goal kicker kicking their heads off. I mean,
that's hilarious! It is hilarious.
And George Allen had the reputation of being the toughest coach in football.
Right?
Said, you want tough? I'll show you. I'll make you guys tough. All right. And it was pretty funny.
Very funny. And Allan was the coach of Washington football, the NFL team, and absolutely was a tough guy, but it was a funny sketch.
Oh, my God.
And,
a funny sketch, but it was playing on his on his reputation.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
He had a good sense.
Years later, years later, we worked with Billy Martin, and Billy Martin was rarely sober, and he was also had a reputation. We did some very funny stuff with him too. We went to the Oakland Coliseum and we talked with him, and it was every second there we were on the edge, but we were laughing our asses off.
Yeah. Now, and let's call it what it is too. Pretty raunchy show. I mean, you did 2 versions, I think. One that had language and nudity, and then one that didn't for CTV, right?
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So we shot it, we did everything with reverse angle so that we, and we made certain that we did a lot of bleeping, even when there wasn't stuff, which made you laugh even more.
Oh my goodness. Today, it wasn't a politically correct show. Let's put it that way. But I have to admit, I laughed and laughed and laughed.
Say, Bill, that is the understatement of this entire hour.
Yes.
Absolutely correct. It was definitely politically correct.
There were sketches, and this was sort of a regular thing where John Byner and some very attractive young lady would be taking off T-shirts over and over again to get down to a message, and they all had writing on the front. And oh my goodness, you didn't miss.
Yeah, that was a great. No, I thought that was a great idea, and it was just fun to watch the timing of it.
And, if you were watching the show, you watched right to the very last T-shirt. It was a very smart idea.
Yes, you did.
And were they? I never attended a taping. I believe it was shot. Was that shot at Agent Court at CTV?
Yeah, it was shot at Agent Court at CTV.
And from that, you had this great idea with Bob Einstein as the director of the show, who would be always giving John Byner a hard time. And then eventually he got more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so he got more and more involved until he created this incredible character, which gave you guys a whole new career, right?
Well, I mean, Super Dave had actually been created earlier. We had done a piece with him, I forget on which show, and then he became a consummate character on the first episode of Bizarre, in which we had him go. There was a daredevil who had actually done a jump off the CN Tower. I forget his name right now, and we did a fake jump off the CN Tower, and it worked. I mean, people really thought that Super Dave had jumped off the tower, so the timing on that was extraordinary. And it set the tone for the kind of stupid, crazy things he was going to do.
Yeah, you can find this sketch on YouTube or wherever. Super Dave is standing on the top of the CN Tower, and his assistant or the sports reporter, "Good luck, Dave," and he opens the door and it knocks Super Dave down to the. Mike Walden knocked it down to the streets of Toronto. Yeah. Very funny.
He knocked it down right where the dome is now. It's right near the workshop where the used to be I think the brewery is there now, but it used to be a workshop for I think either CN or CP.
Yeah,
and it was pretty funny.
Yeah, brilliant. And then I don't know how many seasons of Super Dave, but I did get to Markham to the theater and saw 2 tapings of that. One with, I think, and you had big names. The Smothers Brothers, I think, came up, did an episode. I remember seeing Kim Carnes, different people, different musical acts. Kenny Rogers, I think. It was a very entertaining show. And why Markham?
6 seasons of Bizarre, 5 seasons of Super Dave.
Yeah. And were you just aware that there was a facility there that would work perfectly for shooting this show, or how did you come to be that part of Toronto?
We had originally done the first season at Global in their studio, and it was okay, but it didn't, there wasn't the sort of facility to have an audience the size audience we wanted. And I did some surveying and came across the Markham Theater. Was an open theater that we could bring in our own crews without having any real restrictions. And they were very happy to have us. And we did the seasons 2, 3, 4, and 5 in Markham.
Yeah, it worked perfectly. It was a great facility.
It was great. The dynamic of being able to have a theater that could be dedicated to you and you could hold on to it and not have to take it down because something else is going on in the studio because Global didn't have enough facility at that time. It was great to work in, but it was more like being in LA where you had to set up and then take it down, set up, and that just became too much. So when we went to Markham, we made a deal. We booked the facility out for, I guess, it was almost 2 months each year and put our set in. And just kept redressing it when we had musical acts, but it was just a great place to rehearse it and work in.
And Garry, is there something to, when you look back at SCTV, some of the funniest stuff is back when they were shooting everything in Edmonton, 2,000 miles from Hollywood, is there something about working in isolation in whether it's Markham or Edmonton that is just you're getting maybe less notes that are interfering the creative part of it, or do you think it has anything to do with how good a show is?
Well, when we were doing both Bizarre and Super Dave, Showtime had someone there all the time.
Okay.
And they weren't passive. I mean, they passed notes. I mean, they let things, they had an understanding of what we were trying to do, but they also recognized that there's only so far they could go at that point in time, because it was a new world. You know, we were once again trying to redefine the audience who we're getting, because it was not a late night show. This was going to be in prime time. And, you know, the advantage of being on late night is you can't get away with stuff, because as the later and as you get to midnight and 12:30 at night, the audience that's watching that show is a lot different than the show might be on at 8 o'clock. Or
For sure. Yeah.
Pay TV, it's a different audience.
It seems too. I mean, you were able to tap into a lot of talent for both those shows that was local. I think Billy Van was on Bizarre. Luba Goy from Air Farce, I believe.
Listen, Luba was great, and Billy Van actually came down to work on the Sonny Cher show.
Right.
We had Billy Van, we had Peter Cullen, we had Ted Ziegler.
Yeah.
I mean, Ted's an American, but he's been in Montreal for years, and Billy and Peter Cullen, who eventually became the voice of one of the greatest. I forget, Claudius Maxim, one of those characters for that played in kids animation. I try to think who else. Anyway, then we have Murray Langston as well. So of the basic cast, you had three Canadians and a fourth member who had made his career in Canada and come down to America. So yeah, there were a lot of Canadians around us all the time.
Yeah, it was a great showcase for all of them. Certainly, Billy Van was front and center. The Sonny and Cher show, my goodness, we haven't even talked about that, really. I mean, you guys are producing a show that had to go off the air because the main couple got divorced. And then you came back with the Sonny show, right?
We came back with the Sonny show, which, by the way, really was a terrific show. But we found out that without Cher being a straight man, we could not find the replacement that Sonny could play a straight man to, because that was his greatest talent.
Right.
He was a great receiver, not a great deliverer of jokes.
Yeah. No, but
the show itself was terrific. I mean, we did it. It just, if your star is not the one that they're still looking for Cher, because that's how it worked to begin with.
Yeah.
That he had elevated her, and by taking all the abuse, so to speak, he became the guy that everyone loved because he was taking the abuse. And it was a beautiful, they had a great partnership, because you knew it was a loving relationship, because at the end of every episode there, they were with their daughter.
It must, I don't know, and trying to put myself in the context of the times, people talked about these shows. You only had the networks. There were just the broadcasters. There wasn't even HBO at this point. There was no streaming. There was no DVDs. There no video. So everybody watched. And so everybody would talk about Sonny and Cher the next night, or, what they saw even on Bizarre here in Canada. It resonated, and you must have felt in the center of the whole culture at that point. It must have made your head spin at times.
Well, here's the thing that Al and I had discussed very early when things were first starting out, and that is, we recognized early in our careers that we were guests in people's living room.
Huh?
And the goal was always to be the best guest possible so they'd invite us back. And we never lost sight of that.
Yeah, there's a lot to that, Garry.
Well, I think that was the driving force of why we did things, because we had an audience that we owed something to. Because if you welcome me into your home, I better be a good guest, because you're not going to invite me back if I'm not.
Yeah, there was a feeling, and I would watch the Smothers Brothers with my family, my mom and my dad, in Etobicoke in 1967, 68, and you wanted to gather there on a Sunday night with these guys. And when you look at today, the world and American audiences, Canada and the U.S. are very divided politically. And a show like Smothers was kind of political. I don't know if you'd be able to speak to that big room anymore if just half the audience might not tune in just because times have changed, right?
Well, the one thing they did, though, their opening monologues were always about each other or their mom, but they were not political.
Right.
I remember it was always about the family. And so no matter what happened in the body of the show, they themselves would start that as brothers, and they'd have their issues were what brothers would have no matter what, and not so much about politics, is my recollection. I honestly do not remember an opening monologue that was political.
Yeah, you're right, Garry. Of course, really, a lot of us who write about.
I think that's where Tommy thought that he was doing. He became a very political figure as a result of some of the things. But his comedy was built on the fact that they were brothers and they were doing stuff that they felt strong, that were sort of could happen to any one of us.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think
Mom always loved you best. It's still a great joke, We always know that,
Yeah,
it was about Mom. It was always about Mom because that was their goal. It was always about Mom. Yeah,
really, if you go back and look at the Smothers Brothers shows, they're much less political than all the fuss that those of us who write about TV would say. They were entertaining and yeah, for sure.
I mean, there's the fuss about David Steinberg is when he talked about the fact of Moses and the burning bush, and God saying to him, "No, come closer," and Moses is saying, "No, God, I'll burn my feet. No, trust me. I'm your God. It'll be fine." And he finally came closer and closer, and finally burned his feet. And he shouted, and many refer to it as maybe the first reference to Jesus Christ in the Bible. And for that, people went crazy. They went crazy. That's the joke.
Oh, what a great joke. Very funny.
Great joke. But that joke got everybody in trouble because people said, "Oh, those people in Hollywood, they're anti-Christian." Well, we're not.
Right. They didn't say
the joke.
They didn't say those people from Winnipeg.
They didn't know yet.
That's where the blame should have gone. Very funny, yeah.
Anyway, but you can appreciate that is the subject of a joke that no one can understand how it was. I mean, in today's world, that's a tame joke. Let's be honest. No one's going to put anything off the air if you do that joke.
It's a mind blower, though, Garry. I don't know if you caught last night. I watched Donald Trump was before the big Catholic
the Al Smith dinner. I heard all about it.
Yes, so juxtapose.
They're doing comedy.
Yeah, like David Steinberg's joke about the Bible would have been the tamest thing. That it would have been too tame for that dinner. The things that Trump said were shocking. And it's just wow. How do you?
I can't explain it.
No,
we're sitting on the sidelines and we see these things. But I will say this, and it says something about our industry, and that is, The Apprentice established a personality that most of America still thinks of him as.
Right.
And, we did such a good job, meaning television did such a good job, that you can't undo what you planted in people's brains.
So Mark Burnett's to blame.
He gets the credit, so to speak, in some people's eyes.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No.
And frankly, he was terrific in that show. He was.
He was terrific on it.
The character they created in that show was spectacular.
Yeah.
He was a great television personality, and you can't fault that personality, the Donald. So I have to say, our industry has to take some responsibility for what they created.
He was a great character last night at the Al Smith dinner as well.
So I hear.
I just don't know about being an actual president is different than, I'm so divorced from American politics at this stage in my life, having lived here these last 40 years and more than that, a little over 40 years, that I watch it from afar and I understand it. As I said to you, I look at it and I say to myself, I can understand how so many people, not so much the younger people, but even the younger people, because their parents, talk about the show, and it's not that long ago. Some of these people are in their 30s now. We're teenagers. And so they saw The Apprentice. That's the image they have of him. And I can appreciate that it's easy when you have that image in your mind to continue that for a longer period.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, he emerged in this craze of reality television and became one of the biggest stars. And I was there as a reporter when they would go to the press tours in LA for the television critics. And we would just interview him and be fascinated at the time. But boy, things have changed. I wanted to quickly ask just one other thing. You've been very generous with your time, Garry, but quickly, one name I didn't follow up on, and I'm not sure if both you and Alan worked on these shows, but I think one of you for sure worked on variety shows with Red Fox. Do you have any memories of him? The shows didn't last very long, but he certainly was one of the biggest stars in the 70s on television.
Red Fox was probably the funniest man any of us ever worked with.
Right.
He had never held back for a second. Whatever was on his mind, he spoke. He had talk about breaking a few mores and rules.
Right.
But again, the show really reflected who he was and is, in true history. He was not Sanford when you really get down to it, and I think people were looking for him to be Sanford.
Yeah,
but he was Red, and he was Red, the guy that would go to Vegas and do midnight to 3 in the morning shows, and we tamed him back a bit, but it was a different personality. It's the personality that really was that he was by far the funniest of all the comics we worked with, by far.
I believe it. Yeah.
Just by a look, he could make you laugh. And
right.
The dialogue was unbelievable. So
if you look at reruns of Sanford and Son, they are really funny. And
they are funny because he was just a funny guy, and he could play that character. Though he was never, though he said to us, I'm not a shuck and jiver, because he wasn't.
Right.
Said, I'm a guy that wants to go places. I want to do things. And that was what he tried to do with us. Yeah. And that was a different kind of, it became an uptown Red Fox, and that wasn't who his audience was looking for.
No.
But it was fun to work for us. It was great. We really enjoyed ourselves.
I bet you did. I was able to meet him toward the end of his career. I was starting I was working for TV Guide Canada. I was down in Arizona at a press tour, and he was there trying to make a comeback in 1984 or 5. And at those days, there was like 10 reporters at a table with the star, which was Red Fox. I was a rookie. I didn't know why I was there, what I was doing. And we all put our tape recorders on the table, and he puts his down, and he looks at us all and says, I don't trust any of you, so I'm taping this. And I'll never forget that. That was sort of funny. Yeah, no, he said, this is all going on my record too, so you better get it right. But it was fascinating. I've listened to this tape since, and somebody asked him about Amos and Andy, and I think Bill Cosby, there was some rumor that he wanted to destroy all the episodes of Amos and Andy because it was such a racially prejudiced show. In his opinion, it was offensive, and Fox literally stood up for it and said, I stand on the shoulders of that show. And he sort of went through showbiz, and he mentioned Step and Fetch It. He said, look at those guys. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. And I always thought, I never forgot that. It was fabulous. Yeah.
He absolutely understood that you go through phases, and you need to be seen or heard to be so that people know that you have more than just that. You have a personality. You have a life. That people have, that this community does laugh, and they can laugh at themselves as well as others.
Yeah, no,
whatever it took to make sure that, and those guys opened the door for everyone else.
Yeah, it was a real privilege to hear him that day, and I was glad I did. Now, Garry, your career has continued well into recent years. You did a wonderful series about the Toronto Zoo Diaries, several years ago.
It's still running on it's back running on National Geo Wild. It'll be running till the end of the decade.
Yeah, and it's great that there are platforms now that can showcase these shows that are more to a specific audience. But if people haven't seen it yet, definitely check it out on Nat Geo. So your passion for, I beg your pardon?
I said, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. But your passion for television, it really carried you through to many, many years, and you must have just loved this business, right?
I love this business. You know, I consider myself one of the luckiest people alive to have had a career in an industry that gave me so much and allowed me the opportunity to meet and do so many things that I never thought possible.
Well, thank you for doing all of those things, because it's inspiring for a lot of people. It's very hard to make it in television. It's very hard to make a show that fails. You guys made dozens of shows that made it. And so that's a miracle. And coming from Winnipeg and everything else, it's a great, great story. I am very, very curious. You hinted there may be a documentary in the works. Please keep me posted. I'll be first in line and love to see that. But thank you so much for your time today and sharing these stories about your brother. Condolences again on the loss of a great Canadian and a wonderful television writer and producer, Allan. And, so my best to your family and everybody. And thank you again very much, Garry, for talking to me today.
It's my pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you again when we have this other project up and running.
That'll be fantastic. No, what a great idea. Thanks again. I want to thank once again my guest, Garry Blye, and condolences on the passing of his brother, Allan. The two men were responsible for so much joy and laughter on television. Thanks as always to Phil Hong, my one-man producing team on every one of the 172 episodes of this podcast and counting. Give it up to BJ Del Conte, Paul Boudre, and all the crispy critters, as well as piano man Stephen Dudley, for the music you hear on this podcast. Finally, thanks to you, listener. If you enjoyed this conversation, let us know with a like or a comment at Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Bill Brio. Thanks for listening.